talking about faith in kind of a different context. It's talking about really core values. In other words, what you base your daily activity on. And there are some people that have a real resolve. Like back in the day, of course, for the most of us, Ronald Reagan was a hero of politicians. Now, I never thought that Ronald Reagan was the most intelligent man that I'd ever met. But what I did like about him, he was intelligent enough and he had a resolve. Once he said something, he zeroed in on that and he didn't deviate. And when he said, tear down that wall, when he said, open this gate, you kind of felt like there's a man speaking with authority there who was going to see that thing through. And so he did something which at the time just seemed ridiculously Star Wars-ish. Star Wars-ish. I made that word, you can use it. You know, as a matter of fact, they called it Star Wars, where he said we're going to use lasers and blow missiles out of the sky. Well, the other party, I won't name who they were, they ridiculed him for that. And this was an investment of billions of dollars. And they reasoned with him, and he didn't try to explain nuclear science to them. I mean, he was running against a nuclear scientist himself. That's the way Jimmy Carter pronounced it, and he was one, so go figure. He didn't try to explain it. Jimmy Carter explained everything. And when he finished explaining, you say, not sure which side I'm on. With Ronald Reagan, he just spoke of the resolve and knew which side he was on. And you know what? The Soviets, they had a meeting. I'd love to have been there in that meeting. And they're saying, you think they're really about to do this? You think they could, can this be done? I mean, really, can this be done? And so they started pouring money into the same technology, and it broke them, and they went bankrupt, basically. And the Soviet Union collapsed. Now, the Democrats don't want to give Ronald Reagan credit for it, but he killed communism. Yeah, it's back, but he killed it. And how did he do it? He had a resolve. When he spoke and said we're going to do something, you didn't think maybe he was. You knew he was going to do it. I mean, he just got to it and he did it. So too much can be said about being smart, but having a resolve, there's your magic. I mean, saying it and doing it. If you don't quite know how to do it, find some people who know how to do it and say, here's what we're doing. Figure out a way to do it. And that's what he did. And that became like a core value that I think most of us highly respected. I was a young man. I mean, when he became president, I was just 30 years old, 31 years old. And I just respected the fact that when he spoke, I just felt like it was going to happen. Well, that characterized who he was. And when you even see the old videos of him speaking, you say, well, that's who he was. That was the essence of who he was. Well, let's talk about the essence of who we are. We are hot. And so the essence of who we are, we're going to see reflected in these people with regard to their faith. In Hebrews chapter 11, we're given 19 plus individuals who stood upon their core values. And you're going to see that core values is equal to faith in this context, based upon their faith. Now, you got a rascal or two in here. For instance, Jephthah. He's listed as a hero of the faith in here. Now, if you don't know who Jephthah is, you should start reading Bible tract. Jephthah was the son of a prostitute, mighty warrior. When they got in trouble, they had dogged on him and criticized him, and he was an outcast. But then when they needed deliverance, they called upon Jephthah. And Jephthah took over and became a judge over Israel. Assembled an army, and he made a vow. He said, deliver this enemy into our hand, and the first thing that emerges from my house, I'm going to sacrifice. He thought it was going to be his wife, I think. But I don't know what he thought, but probably, you think he kept goats in his house, really? I don't know what he was thinking, but he said, the first thing that emerges from my house when I get back, I'm going to sacrifice. Well, he mightily won the battle. Now, here's the essence of Hebrews. I'm talking about the people. They had this thing about vows. VOWS. And this thing about vows was they were, call it superstition on some of their part, call it an abiding faith and belief in God on others, but they just didn't break a vow. As a matter of fact, we got 2 chapters, Numbers, 1 in Leviticus, both chapters dealing with what to do about vows. And so his daughter came out of his house. And she said, well, give me 3 months to wail my virginity with my friends, which I don't think was a metaphor for party. I don't think that's what that was. I mean, she really said, give me 3 months and then I'll be sacrificed. And that's what happened. It'd been better if he'd known some Old Testament, because there were ways you could buy out of that. But he felt, well, I promised God this. God did what I asked him to. I made a vow. I'm not going to break it. I'm going to sacrifice her. And she said, all right, you promised. Do it. That's extreme, isn't it? I mean, you know what? I feel just as adamant about making promises. But I use my promise, my collection, I use it sparingly. Because as far as I know, when I've promised something, I've done everything I can to fulfill that promise. If I say I'm going to do it, there's a caveat here. When I tell Evelyn I'm going to put some shelves up, and I tell her, you'll have to remind me every 6 months, I'll get to it. I mean, there's that I mean well, and I haven't actually said I'm not going to do it. It's just, it's overwhelming, all the things that need to be done. But vows, I don't think we take it that way. Remember we used to talk about when we were kids, our parents used to say, my handshake is my promise. It's my guarantee. My word is my bond. Oh, our generation saw it that way, but then suddenly they started slipping away from that. And the generation that followed us, which is the Gen Xers, they don't see it that way at all. And today, you can have a written contract, and they're trying to find ways to pick it apart to get out of the contract. So your word being your bond is just not a thing anymore. But back in Israel, it was. And that was part of their core values. They promised God, and maybe some out of superstition, but some out of the abiding faith they had in God. They felt like, I said I was going to do it. I got to die doing it. I got to try hard or die trying to do it. Core values. Well, when you put core values like that, that was their faith. And Jephthah being the example there. Now, if he'd been more informed in Scripture, there was a way around that. But I don't know why he wasn't, and nobody around him was. I don't know what the problem there was. Because Leviticus and Numbers had already been written, but he didn't get it. But your core values, they actually affect the way you live your life. Now, core values can get mixed up with habits. You know, habits. I wash my hands a lot. It's not really a core value. I mean, I was in the Marine Corps and they made me stop. But as soon as I left there, I started back again. It's not a core value, it's a habit. Well, you know, when it comes to like shaking hands, I shake hands, but I don't know if you'll notice. In my mind, after I shake hands with people, my hand is like this. In my mind it is. Now, I force it down by my side, but so I can, I sanitize my hand. And here's the reason. Here's the reason. Christian, non-Christian. 1 out of 3 people, men, after they use a public restroom, don't wash their hands. That's 1 out of 3. And you know, I just don't like having what you had on your hand smeared on my hand. But I'm going to shake hands because it's socially necessary. But then you can bet I'm going to go sanitize my hand. Now, I don't feel that way about everything. I'll pet animals. And then go wash my hands. But it's just a habit. It's not a core value. I can stop. I stopped for boot camp and infantry training. Had to stop. I mean, I can stop, and I didn't go crazy in between. So it's not a core value, but it is just a habit that I developed. Now, the habit was I went to live with my father and stepmother when I was 10, and they were adamant about just washing your hands constantly. Just wash your hands. And my stepmother wore me out. You wash your hands, you wash your hands, you wash your hands. I mean, she'd stand at the outside the bathroom door and listen to see if she heard the water run, to see if I washed my hands. And so I developed a habit. You can see why I'm like this. You can see that. I mean, it was just a habit that I developed, not based on core values, just a habit. Why do we do what we do? Well, we do it for different reasons. But now it is a core value of mine. I'm a pastor. You probably knew that. It is my job to be an example. I embraced that job from the very first day before I went into the ministry. I embraced that job. And that meant that I will, to the best of my ability, never do anything that's going to embarrass people that follow my ministry. That's why I don't use profanity. Now, even that is not a core value. I don't say gosh and darn and golly, and I don't say those, except to say that I don't say them. I don't use those because I've heard people use those, and I mistakenly thought they used the daddy word. And so I thought, I don't want somebody mistakenly think that I said that. And besides that, what's the difference? You know. Now, when I'm at home and I mash my finger, I still don't say it. Might think it. It's not the same thing. She didn't even try to whisper. That was just an overt rebuke. That was. I don't do it. And you know why? I got out of the habit. I heard my fill of it when I was in the Marine Corps. I heard configurations of profanity that would blow your mind. As a matter of fact, I still sometimes think about the one the drill instructor even laughed at. And he said, "Where did you come up with something like that?" It wasn't me, it was another guy. And I don't do it. I have gotten out of the habit to where I haven't done it since I was a teenager. I stopped doing it when I was in the Marine Corps, using gosh and golly, because I thought, well, hey, why not just go all the way? So people ask me, so I played racquetball, so they don't anymore. They say, well, what do you do if you get disgusted with yourself? And you can ask people to play with. I say, oh, that's the extent of it. And then at home, if I do something, I'll go, and actually Evelyn's on to me now. I'll say, and she'll say, what's wrong? Say, now, as I said, that is not a core value. I mean, if it were, that'd be different. It's not a core value. If it were a core value, then I'd be very critical of those of you that use euphemisms for profanity. But it's not a core value. Now, I think my way is best if you love your testimony, which comes back to what's my core value. My core value is protect my testimony. Protect my testimony. I love the Lord. I want other people to love the Lord. So I need to protect my testimony so that I don't give them reason to find fault with the Lord. It's just really, really important to me. So I would say that is my core value. Now here's a scripture on that. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 10:31, he says, whether therefore you eat or drink or whatever you do. Now what he's doing there in that passage, that whole 10th chapter and much of the 8th chapter, he's making a case for, is it okay to eat meat that's sitting on the table that you discover has been offered to idols? And there were Christians who'd be greatly offended if you ate that meat offered to idols because, it was offered to idols. And it was also the issue of drinking wine. And believe it or not, and I hate to break this to you, now I don't drink, and as a teenager sipped a couple things, but I've never imbibed in alcohol. Never will. Is that a core value? It's not a core value. The core value is protecting my testimony. So if you drink a little, I don't care. I just feel like if you loved your testimony as much as I love my testimony, you probably wouldn't, but I don't care if you do. There's nothing in the scripture. And here's what Paul's saying right here. He said, it is good neither to eat flesh nor drink wine nor anything whereby your brother stumbles or offended or is made weak. Well, that's pretty clear, isn't it? And so he goes and gives an illustration in 1 Corinthians 8 and 1 Corinthians 6. So you sit down and you start to eat a big piece of meat there, and the guy punches you next to you and says, it's been offered to idols. You know what Paul says? Don't eat it. If you wasn't there, you'd eat it. People say, well, isn't that hypocrisy? No, because the core value is protecting my testimony. I don't gamble. Haven't gambled since my daddy wouldn't let me gamble. Going to the theme park and came back with a couple little prizes because the girl next door took me, behind us took me. And he said, what'd you do? I said, well, you got this. And he said, did you gamble? I said, it wasn't gambling. It was gambling. And I was like 11 years old. I've not done it since. I don't do it. Don't gamble. Is that a core? It's not a core value. I might start gambling tomorrow. It's not a core value. But I'm protecting my testimony, and protecting my testimony, that is my core value. So it's interesting to understand the difference between I don't make a habit of doing this as opposed to it's my core value. And a lot of believers don't understand. We're talking about in Hebrews chapter 11, these men of faith with core values that caused them to do what they did. So to go on, he says, whether therefore you eat or drink or whatever you do all to the glory of God. Give none offense neither to the Jew nor to the Gentile nor to the church of God. That's hard. Even as 1 Corinthians 10:33, even as I please all men in all things, not seeking mine own profit, but the profit of many, that they may be saved. Paul's core value was the salvation of other people, and anything that interfered with him being able to reach them, he was going to leave out. These symptoms, these things, they weren't the core value. The core value is down here, testimony. And that's what Hebrews chapter 11 is all about. So, now faith, verse 1, is the substance. And I got a Greek word up there. I don't do that very often, but hypostasis. Stasis is a stand, and hupa is an under. So the word means a substructure, a foundation. You know, you build your house. You've seen houses that are built on stilts. Down along the Ohio River, as we'd have to drive the pretty good distance next to the Ohio River, going to my dad's house in Elizabeth, Indiana. Get to Louisville. I could look across the river and see where we were going, but it took 45 minutes to get there because we had to, make that trip. And a lot of houses that are built on the river, vacation houses, that didn't have foundations, they were just on stilts. Nobody ever thought the water would get up as high as it did, and it did. As a matter of fact, the casino, they lost their boat dock and the riverboat gambling. You get on the riverboat to go down to about 20 feet and comes back over 2 hours, and that kept the gambling not on Indiana and not on Kentucky, but the hotel was on the Indiana side, and they got lots of tax dollars. Then after the big rain we had a few years ago, it washed the dock out and shut them down for a while. And so then they said, who we fooling? So they built a casino over on the Indiana side, and they had riverboat gambling. Well, the reality is that without a foundation, things are a problem. Sometimes if you have a foundation that's not secure, it's still a problem. Sometimes if you have a foundation that's not built on solid ground, that's a problem. Faith is the substance. So everything I do is built upon a substance that you really can't see. It's faith. My faith, my core value, is something that I can't pull out of my pocket and show you. I can't show you a certificate. I can just show you God's word and say, well, it's in here. But faith, your core values, it's the substance of things that we are anticipating, hope for, the evidence of things not seen. Now, it's tough not to have a solid substance, to solid foundation. I mean, you saw me for a year. I was walking around like this. And there were people who met me during that time that I didn't have an opportunity to explain to them that I hoped this was temporary, because I actually got to the point I wasn't sure. And so people saw me as the limping old man. Really, when I went to, I'd go to the gym and I'd drag myself in like this, and took the garbage to the street, and it's a little incline going up to the road, and I'd have to stop 2 or 3 times before I could get to the top of the driveway. I mean, it was just, my foundation was all gone. Hip problems, knee problems. It's tough, isn't it? I mean, some of us had those surgeries. If your foundation's bad, forget everything above it. It's in trouble too. So faith is the basis for our core values. Now, one's practices are a reflection of our core values. The fact that I don't gamble, drink, use profanity, and not lying. I mean, now, let me qualify that. There's certain lies I justify. And I base that upon Jeremiah. There's lots of lying in the Old Testament. There's lots of God-blessed lying in the Old Testament. If somebody asks me how do I like their hair, the answer is I like it fine. I mean, I think it's tacky for you to ask me. And so I think it's completely legitimate if I say I like it fine. You may say, well, I'd have preferred that you You ever try that? So that kind of, but as much as possible, I never lie to get myself out of trouble. I mean, every once in a while I miss an appointment. And I could, makes me want to get pets just so I could say my dog was sick. But actually, if I miss an appointment with you, I just tell you, I forgot. Sorry, I forgot. Don't know what happened, I forgot. I just don't lie to get myself out of trouble. Because of my core values. People suspect when you're lying to get out of trouble. And that's an attack on my core values. I don't want that. So faith is the reason you double down. Faith is the reason that you have the practices that you have. Our practices are a reflection of one's core values. I should say is at the end. To explain. But without faith, it is impossible to please Him. Now, you can do all the right things, but if you're not doing it for the right reason, all those things, I hate to say this, they don't really count if you're not doing them for the right reason. It's what you do because of God. That's your faith. That's your core value. And quite frankly, without faith, without that core value that's motivating you to do what you do, I think I got switched back. Without that faith to motivate you to do what you're doing, what do you got? I'll tell you what you got. You got shifting core values. And by the way, let me just slightly wander off into politics here just a moment. If you look at the definition of a conservative from 20 years ago, and what is perceived as the definition of a conservative today, they're not the same. It has changed. And I do find that very disturbing. Because I like things to be steadfast and sure. And when I proclaim myself to be a conservative, in this day and age, I'm not sure what people perceive that to be today. I'm just saying, I hate to be brutally honest about that, but the core values have changed, which means they weren't really core values. We are in a period today where populism rules in both parties. You get what the liberal crowd wants, and you write it down. You say, this is what we believe. This is the. And how many Democrats have you seen who say, I've always been a Democrat, but I don't believe in this stuff anymore. I didn't leave them, they left me. But the same things happen over on the conservative side. I mean, I don't recognize a lot of the things that we believe today as so-called conservatives, because it's morphed and it's become populism for stuff that makes conservatives mad. That's what it is. What upsets us? Well, you know what upsets us. I don't have to tell you what upsets us. And so we're going to call that the conservative position, because it upsets us. And so as far as core values for what's a liberal and what's a conservative, we don't know anymore. We don't. As a matter of fact, what's interesting about that is what were core values for the left 30 years ago are today core values for the right 30 years later, and some of that has flip-flopped the other direction as well. I mean, how do you evaluate that? I guess the biggest disturbance in my life today is the absence of core values. And when we look at Hebrews chapter 11, that faith, it's about core values. And these men had core values that they were willing to die for. Because without core values, it is impossible to please him. For he who comes to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. There are lots of illustrations in this chapter. Lots of illustrations. But let's take a look at Abraham. Abraham had a promise from God. He obeyed when he was called to go out to the place which he would receive as an inheritance. And he went out not knowing where he was going. By faith, that faith was, he just believed God. He dwelt in the land of promise as in a foreign country, dwelling in tents with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs of him of the same promise. For he waited for the city who has foundations, whose builder and maker is God. Now, when you follow the life of Abraham, it's fascinating if somebody fills in some figures for you. When Abraham left Ur, passed through Haran, he was 75 years old. I'll be 75 next month. And it keeps switching back. Are you doing that? Well, you know, I do have my maybe this is poking it. He was 75 when he left Earth. God promised him descendants. He didn't have any. Chapter 15 said, your own son. Because for a while he thought maybe, I think Eliezer was his servant. And he thought, well, through him. But he said, no, you're going to have him come from you, Abraham. So when he was 86, now look, 11 years later, when he's 86, he has Ishmael. Sarah said it was all right. All right. He has Ishmael with Hagar. But then in chapter 18, he's told that no. The heir you're going to have is going to be through you and Sarah, which didn't happen until he was 100 years old. So, let's reflect back. 75, God made him a promise that didn't get fulfilled for 25 more years. At a time when Abraham had to have been wondering, do I have 25 years left? When I buy a tree, that's one of the things I ask him, how long is it going to take to grow? I mean, here he's wondering. That's a pretty slow unfolding, isn't it? So when you're talking about values that are core, of faith, an abiding faith. you got to admit Abraham had it. Because God made a promise and he believed the promise. He wasn't going to doubt the promise. He believed the promise absolutely. By faith, Moses, when he became of the age, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God and to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures at Egypt, for he looked to the reward. His core. Moses had a core. His core values was, I'm just going to do what God says. God raised him up with those values. Question is, what's your core value? I mean, I'm not talking about your habits. I'm talking about why you do what you do. And my question is, does your life reflect your faith? Hope it does. Let's stand together, please, with our heads bowed and our eyes closed.